What's going on, everybody? This is Afro Think Tank. Black woman explains how barbaristic America and its capitalistic system is. And I have to agree with this intelligent black woman. I mean, we've all been tricked to think that capitalism is the only way for people to organize and to be able to function as a society. And if you notice, America likes to downplay socialism, right? To the point to where socialism, even in the media, is looked at as terrible, bad. And the most people who look down on socialism, as they look like they equate socialism as a step towards communism, even though most of the people saying that, they don't know what socialism is, they don't know what communism is, and they think that the Chinese government is practicing communism when that's not communism, that's capitalism. All right, Chinese government is practicing capitalism, a capitalistic, communistic, hybrid type government. America, right, has a capitalistic slash socialistic government. And the most popular things that make America worth living, the thing that makes people go from their countries to our country, is our socialistic programs that's so popular. If you try to get rid of one of those socialistic programs, the entirety of the America's population would lose all of their collective minds, right? Social Security, Medicaid, those are socialistic programs, right? Public transport, public works, public water, those public buses, all those things are socialistic services that capitalism gets credit for. But in fact, the reason why, people don't fall through the cracks the way, in some other countries they do, is because we have socialistic programs that allow us to have a safety net. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to let this beautiful, beautiful, intelligent black woman explain it better to me, because we literally got to do something different. This capitalism thing, the way we got it going around now, it's just not going to work. Anyway, tell me what you guys think in the comment section. Just Afro Think Tank, learn some, teach some. I'm out.
The United States government gets really disturbed when they are confronted with a group of people or a country that is able to thrive without their vampiric interference. And when you look at foreign policy and the way that they treat domestic Americans over time through this lens, suddenly a lot of the U.S. government's actions start to make sense. The way that they go so hard after socialists is because when a people group is self-governing to the point where they can feed themselves, they can police themselves without the need for violence, they can handle disputes amongst themselves, they can send the children to school and actually create some really great schools, they can offer true education, they can even coordinate with people in other communities. What it does is reveal capitalism for the barbarism that it is, and it also reveals how completely unnecessary capitalism is. And of course, if you've learned anything after watching my videos, you know that the US government cannot have that. And so chapter 15 of A People's History of the United States, titled Self-Help in Hard Times, opens up to, we are now in a post-World War I world. And try saying that 5 times fast, post-World War I world. And what we have is a bunch of people who are still working like it's the 19th century, and they're still basically being paid like it's the 19th century. And all of the money that the US government made by waging war, like by getting involved in a world war, none of it reached the Americans, needless to say. It's not Americans who are getting enriched by our government's actions. It's the government itself getting enriched, and they're starving the fuck out of all of us. And this is how it's always been. And so in the beginning of chapter 15, Self-Help in Hard Times, Howard Zinn sets the scene. He says the war was hardly over. It was February 1919. The IWW leadership was in jail, but the IWW idea of the general strike became reality for 5 days in Seattle, Washington, when a walkout of 100,000 working people brought the city to a halt. But it wasn't necessarily the strike itself that disturbed and pissed off the government leaders, so much as it was how efficient the strike was, because the strikers' efficiency revealed how inefficient the government was. And this kind of reminds me of what Mamdani is doing. A lot of establishment Democrats don't like Mamdani because he's getting out there boots on the ground. He's fucking working, bitch. Since day one, since before day one, he's been out there in New York actively doing what a mayor is supposed to do. That man is fulfilling every single bullet point of his job description. And the people in power who have been stalwarts of power for a generation don't like that, because what it reveals is that they don't do a fuck thing ever. So let's get into talking about this Seattle general strike, what it was for, what it accomplished, and why it freaked the powers that be out so bad. So, in the beginning, it was about 35,000 shipyard workers in Seattle that were striking for a wage increase. Okay. And so, what they did was they went to a local Seattle union called the Seattle Central Labor Council, asking for basically leadership and advice. How should we go about this? And then the Seattle Central Labor Union suggested that they do a citywide strike. Okay, so they were like, okay, you want a wage increase? This is how we're going to do it. We're going to organize. We're going to make the whole fucking city strike. Not just the shipyard workers. I'm talking everybody. This is what's called a general strike. And Seattle workers had a tradition of being radical in the first place. And if you remember with the No Kings protest early on, people in the Pacific Northwest, Portland and Seattle and all of that, the way they were protesting, some people took issue with it because they're being too silly. They're wearing costumes. They're not taking this seriously enough. Actually, that's like in their roots. The way that people in Seattle protest is not the same way people in Birmingham, Alabama protest, or people in New York City protest, or people in Chicago protest, or people in Atlanta protest. They've always led with a sense of community and joy. And actually, it's that community and joy that the government freaks out about the most, but I'm going to get to why. So I'm going to read you directly from the book here. The city now stopped functioning, except for activities organized by the strikers to provide essential needs. Firemen agreed to stay on the job. Laundry workers handled only hospital laundry. Vehicles authorized to move carried signs that read, "Exempted by the General Strike Committee." 35 neighborhood milk stations were set up. Every day, 30,000 meals were prepared in large kitchens, then transported to halls all over the city and served cafeteria style, with strikers paying 25 cents a meal and the general public paying 35 cents. People were allowed to eat as much as they wanted of the beef stew, spaghetti, bread, and coffee. And so that's actually a phenomenal feat. You managed, without any modern technology, to gather up all the people in the city and make sure that while this strike was going on, nobody's going hungry, nobody's feeling lonely, nobody's sleeping outside in the cold. Because keep in mind, it's February. And we brought everything to a halt, including the city services. And the only vehicles that are driving around, the only services that are still going, is because people actively need that to live, and they have to come and get our permission before they go and do that job. They need a stamp of approval from us that says exempted by the General Strike Committee in order to move. That's how organized these people got. They even had their own police force. So a labor war veterans guard was organized to keep the peace. On the blackboard of one of its headquarters was written, quote, "The purpose of this organization is to preserve law and order without the use of force. No volunteer will have any police power or be allowed to carry weapons of any sort, but to use only persuasion," end quote. During the strike, crime in the city decreased. The commander of the U.S. Army detachment sent into the area told the strikers committee that in 40 years of military experience, he hadn't seen so quiet and orderly a city. Now, I want to pause there and point this point out. So it says that during the strike, crime in the city decreased. One thing I learned very, very early on in this book, I'm talking back in chapter 1 or 2 when we were still talking about Christopher Columbus and the Arawak natives. One thing I learned is that capitalism breeds crime. And capitalism breeds crime by depriving people of their basic needs and then putting them in impossible situations to where they have to choose between a bad decision and a worse one. And so capitalism increases crime. And then what does that do? If capitalism is going to create impossible conditions, inhumane conditions to where people's people are basically being psychologically abused 24/7 because of their environment, because of the lack, the poverty, the desperation, the depression, and the anxiety that comes from being poor and not having enough. Eventually what happens is they go out and they commit a crime, because if it's between me going and stealing from the grocery store and watching my kids starve to death, guess which one I'm going to choose? And then that brings the police out. The police cause even more of a scene. Now everybody's freaking out. And where do these people go who were turned into criminals by the capitalist system? Into the for-profit prison system, which just continues to feed and bolster capitalism. So I just wanted to point that one out. Now, going back to the fact that people in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest in general have a history of protesting with joy and silliness, I want to read you this poem that showed up in the Seattle Union Record, which was a daily newspaper that was put out by labor people. And it was a woman named Anise that wrote this poem. She said, "What scares them the most is that nothing happens. They are ready for disturbances. They have machine guns and soldiers, but this smiling silence is uncanny. The businessmen don't understand that sort of weapon. It is your smile that is upsetting their reliance on artillery, brother. It is the garbage wagons that go along the street marked exempt by strike committee. It is the milk stations that are getting better daily, and the 300 war veterans of labor handling crowds without guns. For these things speak of a new power and a new world that they do not feel at home in." And I think that's a really beautiful way to even describe the No Kings protests, because what the US government knows how to deal with is your anger. They're really used to your anger, your pain, and your suffering, and your outrage. They know exactly how to respond. And whether they respond as the good cop or the bad cop, they're extremely practiced in dealing with an outraged people. What they don't know exactly how to respond to is a people whose joy cannot be shaken, is a people whose strength comes from an internal source that they can't manipulate. And so when the leaders of Seattle started seeing these strikers go about their business so efficiently and so in such like an organized way, to the point where like there were no fights there were probably fights breaking out, but there was no real violence happening. These people were totally self-sufficient. They saw that as anarchy. Even though nothing happened. Nobody broke any beer bottles. Nobody was throwing bricks through windows. There wasn't any mob violence. Nothing got out of hand. That is what concerned the leaders the most. The mayor swore in 2,400 special deputies, many of them students at the University of Washington. Almost 1,000 sailors and Marines were brought into the city by the U.S. government. The general strike ended after 5 days, according to the General Strike Committee, because of pressure from international officers of the various unions, as well as the difficulties of living in a shut-down city. The strike had been peaceful, but when it was over, there were raids and arrests. On the Socialist Party headquarters, on a printing plant, 39 members of the IWW were jailed as ringleaders of anarchy. And so like all of these like capitalist groups, whether we're talking about the mayor, the mayor's deputies, or the people who were aligned with the American Federation of Labor, which was somehow a labor union that was capitalist somehow, all of these capitalists started attacking socialists in the city because that general strike scared the shit out of them. And they took it so far as to lynch a socialist because they dared to threaten the capitalist system or make the capitalist system look stupid, which is, by the way, really easy to do. To tell you about this, I'm just going to read directly from the book because I believe that Howard Zinn writes this better than I could ever retell it to you. So here we go. In Centralia, Washington, where the IWW had been organizing lumber workers, the lumber interest made plans to get rid of the IWW. On November 11, 1919, Armistice Day, the Legion paraded through town with rubber hoses and gas pipes, and the IWW prepared for an attack. When the Legion passed the IWW hall, shots were fired. It is unclear who fired first. Probably the Legion. Let's be so fucking for real. They stormed the hall, there was more firing, and 3 Legion men were killed. Inside the headquarters was an IWW member, a lumberjack, named Frank Everett, who had been in France as a soldier while the IWW national leaders were on trial for obstructing the war effort. Everett was in army uniform and carrying a rifle, so they knew that he was an army man. They knew he had sacrificed for this country. He emptied it into the crowd, dropped it, and ran for the woods, followed by a mob. He started to wade across the river, found the current too strong, turned, shot the leading man dead, threw his gun into the river, and fought the mob with his fist. They dragged him back to town behind an automobile, suspended him from a telegraph pole, took him down, locked him in jail. That night, his jailhouse door was broken down. He was dragged out, put on the floor of a car, his genitals were cut off, and then he was taken to a bridge, hanged, and his body riddled with bullets. He died like a black man. No one was ever arrested for Everett's murder, but 11 Wobblies, the IWW, were put on trial for killing an American Legion leader during the parade, and 6 of them spent 15 years in prison. Let me just pause here and say, these are some sick fucking people. This version of Americans, the type that go out and lynch and cut people's dicks and titties off and shit, they exist like all over the country. It's not just a Southern thing, because what these people are capitalist zombies, and they will eat the brain of literally anybody that their capitalist leaders sick them on. The reason they never found the people who were guilty of Everett's murder, guarantee you they were police officers. I promise they were police officers. This is how police officers get down. Because how the fuck did they get in the jail to get him out in the first place? Okay. And then Howard Zinn speaks directly to why there was such a violent reaction to such a peaceful protest. Why such a reaction to the general strike, to the organizing of the Wobblies? A statement by the mayor of Seattle suggests that the establishment feared not just the strike itself, but what it symbolized. He said, quote, the mayor of Seattle said, quote, "The so-called sympathetic Seattle strike was an attempted revolution. That there was no violence does not alter the fact. The intent, openly and covertly announced, was for the overthrow of the industrial system, here first, then everywhere." True, there were no flashing guns, no bombs, no killings. Revolution, I repeat, doesn't need violence. The general strike, as practiced in Seattle, is of itself the weapon of the revolution, all the more dangerous because quiet. To succeed, it must suspend everything, stop the entire life stream of a community. That is to say, it puts the government out of operation. And that is all there is to revolt, no matter how achieved. They were genuinely afraid that the socialist challenge, which had been challenging them since well into the 19th century, since decades before now, they were so scared that socialism was going to overtake capitalism, that they were going to extreme lengths to keep that from happening. Because this is not something that was just happening in Seattle. These strikes weren't something that was just happening in Boston and Chicago and Philadelphia and New York. This is shit that was, this type of revolutionary energy was sweeping the globe, because that's what revolutionary energy is. It's a cry from the soul of the collective consciousness to let my people go. And it's not something that any one person can control or stop or start. It's a cry from the very pit of humanity itself, screaming out for freedom, right? And so a writer in The Nation commented on what was going on all around the world that year in 1919 after the end of World War I. The writer said, "The most extraordinary phenomenon of the present time is the unprecedented revolt of the rank and file. In Russia, it has dethroned the Tsar. In Korea and India and Egypt and Ireland, it keeps up an unyielding resistance to political tyranny. In England, it brought about the railway strike against the judgment of the men's own executives. In Seattle and San Francisco, it has resulted in the stevedores' recent refusal to handle arms or supplies destined for the overthrow of the Soviet governments. In one district of Illinois, it manifested itself in a resolution of striking miners, unanimously requesting their state executive to go to hell. In Pittsburgh, according to Mr. Gompers, it compelled the reluctant American Federation officers to call the steel strike, lest the control pass into the hands of the IWWs and other radicals. In New York, it brought about the longshoremen's strike and kept the men out in defiance of union officials, and caused the upheaval in the printing trade, which the international officers, even though the employers worked hand in glove with them, were completely unable to control. The common man, losing faith in the old leadership, has experienced a new access of self-confidence, or at least a new recklessness, a readiness to take chances on his own account. Authority cannot any longer be imposed from above. It automatically comes from below." So Howard Zinn opens chapter 15, setting the scene for what life was like in post-World War I America and what it looked like when the capitalist government was failing the citizens to such a degree that they were now starting to just stop working, like the whole city shutting down until you guys pay us more. And the whole chapter is giving anecdotes and examples of what the United States government did and didn't do in the face of desperate American citizens that were literally begging for relief. And this is the chapter that takes us through the Great Depression and into the New Deal. And spoiler alert, the New Deal was not this like sweeping radical liberal peak of American history. What it was like bare minimum breadcrumb concessions to the people so that the cry for socialism could calm the fuck down. So let's get into chapter 15.
The texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Free Sudan, boycott diamonds and gold. Free Sudan, boycott diamonds and gold. We most definitely cannot forget about the people of Sudan.
Thanks for watching Afro Think Tank. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Substack and Patreon for more content. Remember, it's Pan-Africanism or nothing.